Hello, everyone. Welcome back. My name is Jeff Mendelson, and this is the One Big Tip podcast. My guest today is Matthew Turner. Matthew is a British author who wrote his latest book, Beyond the Pale, on the back of interviewing hundreds of successful entrepreneurs, authors, investors, and thought leaders. As well as writing books, Matthew ghostwrites articles and books for other successful entrepreneurs as well. Beyond the Pale is about a fast paced millennial that is always switched on, ready to work, and dreams of changing the world. It takes you on a journey to discovery and gives insight into the business world. It looks at one powerfully successful entrepreneur's road to riches and examines the soul beneath the quest for answers by finding out how to ask the right questions. I'm really excited to have this conversation. Matthew, thank you so much for joining me and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Jeff. A real pleasure to be here. Delighted that you invited me on. And yes, I'm excited to not only share some insights into the book, but into this sort of one big tip. So yeah, I'm excited.
Amazing. Yeah, so do me a favor. Tell the audience a little bit about who you are and what makes you so amazing.
Well, you did such a wonderful job of introducing me there. But yeah, I suppose the underlying aspect of my world is writing. So I am a writer for my own books. As you said, last summer I produced my fifth book called Beyond the Pale. So I've been writing like pretty much full time in some capacity for about 10 years now. And my journey began probably 7 or 8 years before then. So I've been on a trial and error path in terms of writing. I've always had that storytelling gene, but writing wasn't something that necessarily came naturally to me. It wasn't something that I learned at school per se. I learned through a lot of trial and error, doing the work, listening to editors, rinse and repeat. And several million words later, here I am with several books under my belt, as well as ghostwriting for others as well. So these days, I split my time between writing for myself, but also writing as other people, whether that's a book or whether it's in the form of emails and articles, a little bit of copywriting overlap there. But most of what I do is ghostwriting, which is very exciting. I get to work with some incredible people. I get to learn a great deal by almost literally stepping into their minds and trying to write and impersonate them. I've learned so much through that process, and it's been amazing because it's had an impact on my life. And when something impacts my life, it then impacts my writing. So yeah, it all blends with one another.
What's interesting about the ghostwriting aspect and then borrowing some of those lessons learned, when you're working for other clients and then you bring it into your own wheelhouse, is that it really gives you a fresh perspective on
Yes.
what is interesting and what is moving and how other people make money and how other people are successful. What would you say is like one of the more poignant aspects of being able to bring in the aspects of the ghostwriting into into the books that you yourself author?
Yeah, well, they feed one another. So, I mean, the one constant in all this is like, that brain of mine in between my ears. I've grown in confidence, especially over the last couple of years. When someone hires me to, write, whether it's an article or a book, they're doing so because I'm bringing something unique to the table. So it's finding that balance between owning my voice and my style because they're hiring me for a reason, but then being very open and always thinking about how I can bring their language, their style, their mannerisms into the words to form those sentences and those paragraphs and those chapters and those narratives. So I'm constantly bringing myself into the projects, client or my own, but I'm constantly bringing their stories and anecdotes into both my projects and their own. So it's something that fuels one another. And I feel it helps me learn as a writer all the time. And it's constantly making me curious because whenever I work with a new entrepreneur, they're just bringing new thoughts into it. Usually they're further along the road than me. They're hiring me because they don't have the time, but they do have the money. So they're further along than me in many ways, and I'm learning them. I'm able to step into the shoes of someone who may be, 2, 3, 5, 10 years further down that road than me. So it's interesting because I'm constantly able to reflect on that and think, what can I learn from this person? Where am I able to relate to them? Where am I not able to relate to them? And then why is that? So that curiosity fuels a lot. in me. I'm a very curious person. My mind is always switched on, and sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes that's a less so good thing. But it's always beneficial in terms of my writing because, yeah, it fuels the inspiration at all times.
One of the interesting things about about your style of writing and what you're trying to bring to the market is, a better understanding of what it takes to connect with other people, right? And that's really what entrepreneurship is all about. We're all about pushing, a new product, a new way of thinking, a new modality into getting more work done faster, doing it smarter, not working
Mm.
so hard, things like that. There's a lot of stuff that goes into it. And I can tell you from my experience, you can really get lost in that hustle, right? You
Oh
can
yeah.
really get lost, thinking about, well, I'm going to work out of any local we work around the world, and I'm going to make it happen for myself. And then what you end up doing is, you sort of get lost in the, well, am I going to work from the beach with with a beautiful view, or am I going to work out of a big city? How do you keep, that hustle, that energy going, but also how are you going to make it happen for your clients? Because at the end of the day, you are there to serve, your clients, and in a very specific capacity. And tell me a little bit about what it is that you've learned by working with these entrepreneurs and bringing it over into this book and being able to synthesize it into something that people can actually relate to, learn from, and take advantage of.
Sure. It all began with one of my previous books called A Successful Mistake. I interviewed 160 odd people for that book, many of them like we're doing now over like Zoom, Skype, as it was back then. And I asked them about their biggest failure or their biggest mistake and the lessons they learned from that and how it set the foundations for success and growth and progression. I learned so much during that process, but one of the biggest takeaways was that successful people understand what success means to them. And usually when they were making that mistake or that failure, they were following another version of success that someone else placed on them, whether it was a parent or a teacher, friends, the media, society's general outlook on what success is. When it started to click into place was when they just took a step back and defined success on their terms. That was a game changer for me because I realized I too had been following a version of success placed upon me, pushed onto me. So that made me curious. I was like, okay, well, if that isn't what success is for me, what does success look like for me? And that took me on a journey where I dove into a whole host of personal development around mindset and habits and peeking into my past and doing therapy and a lot of things to really kind of start to understand what's going on inside here because there was a lot of beliefs in there was a lot of stories which weren't necessarily true. So I step by step began to better appreciate what success meant to me. I also began to understand that it's malleable and that it's not set in stone and that we go through different chapters in life. And as we transition from one to another, success is always changing. And this made me very curious about our relationship with work and in an umbrella, the hustle, how we're constantly saying yes to things that we shouldn't necessarily be saying yes to, how we're constantly doing more and more and more because that's just our default setting. And that is really what inspired me to write Beyond the Pale. I always liked this idea of one day writing a book where I would combine my passions for both fiction and nonfiction into some kind of fable, because books like The Alchemist really inspired me and brought a whole lot of lessons to life in ways that a normal how-to nonfiction never would or could. And Beyond the Pale ignited within me once I started to assess my relationship with the hustle. And it, yeah, ignited the character that is Ferdinand and his journey. I'm very different to Ferdinand. Ferdinand is certainly not me, but a lot of the stuff that Ferdinand goes through over the course of the book, a lot of the questions he has, a lot of the frustrations, a lot of the feelings, they were what I had at the time. And in some cases, I still do. So it fueled that. So I was walking alongside Ferdinand, experimenting along the way. And in the sequel to Beyond the Pale, I'm doing exactly the same thing. So me and Ferdinand, very different people, but we're kind of like holding each other's hand, guiding each other along the way to try and better understand, like, what is the hustle like? What is our relationship to work? Why are we so programmed into working harder and longer out of, the fear of missing out of fear of getting it wrong? And it's been a fascinating rabbit hole to dive into.
I love the way you articulated that because, as I'm thinking about my journey, my definition of success has changed many times, right?
Yeah.
I can count maybe about 5 or 6 times I've had to reinvent myself in my career already, between being laid off all these different times, starting my entrepreneurial journey, just trying to figure out like, okay, I just got fired from my last job. How am I going to afford my Starbucks habit? Right? How am I going to pay the mortgage? And and then going through other stuff. Well, now I want to travel more, and that became very important to me, right? So how am I going to make that happen while servicing all those other responsibilities that I have, being a dad, being a successful project manager for my businesses, making sure that the people that work with me have the tools that they need in order for them to succeed and feel great and fulfilled with the work that I'm giving them. One of the things that I found was interesting was, the concept of letting go of what was important to me before, and, sort of articulating what is important to me now, and what is good, and also doing a little bit of planning. What's going to be important to me in the future? For example, like my kids are starting to age out. They're going to start going to university, right? And that means they're not going to be home. And if they're not going to be home, then that means I don't need to be home, right? If they're going to be
Yeah.
away at university, I can, come to London for a month, or I can, go hang out in some other locale, or, just whatever, and just make it happen and start, working on myself. How do you see people that when they are in that precipice of starting another phase of their life, of sort of morphing that idea of what success means to them from one to the other? How do you see entrepreneurs articulating that, and how, like, what advice would you give them, or would Ferdinand give them, from your parable?
It's interesting, and yeah, the relationship between one defining success to you and constantly assessing your relationship with the hustle, they kind of go hand in hand, because the hustle is around us. Like, you are going to be at the mercy of the hustle always, because the hustle isn't just this idea of working 12, 15-hour days. That's a toxic part of it. But really, when I think about the hustle, I think about our ever connected world. So right now, someone's watching this, listening to it, their phone's probably within arm's reach. They may even be listening to this as they're scrolling through social media. Within a couple of minutes, you can get an edited version of 10, 20, 30 people's lives. We're constantly comparing ourselves to others. We're constantly able to access our email. We're constantly able to go into Slack. We're constantly able to go into Facebook Messenger, etc., etc., etc. So there's always that pressure. There's always that temptation to be able to do a little bit more. Because yesteryear, when you left the office, you couldn't do work unless you took it home with you. Like, most people had to leave their work in the office because that was the only way they were able to access it. They weren't constantly able to see all these other people's seemingly perfect lives because they only saw who they saw. They didn't have this incredible little computer in the palm of their hands where they were able to see dozens, hundreds, thousands of other people in the space of 24 hours. So the hustle today is like on steroids. We're constantly connected. We constantly have access to it. So it isn't going anywhere. So you have to constantly assess your relationship with it. Because if you don't, it will get you. You will find yourself caught up into it. So you will find yourself working longer, harder, saying yes to a few more things in the pursuit of this, that, and the other. And if you're doing that, you don't have the bandwidth to take a step back and go, what does success mean to me? Is the definition of success the same today as it was when I went through this exercise 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago? So if you don't have the time to do that, then you will start to default to society's version of success. So you'll start to go, well, maybe I'll feel happier if I upgrade the car. Maybe I'll feel happier if I buy this. Maybe I'll be happier if I reach that. So they fuel one another. It's really difficult to escape the hustle unless you appreciate what success means to you, because you don't have a greater depth of purpose. But then it's really difficult to define success on your terms if you don't take a step away from the hustle. So you can't have one without the other. And I'm hoping that kind of gives you a little bit of an insight into like the first step. It's just becoming aware of that, going, wow, if I'm caught up in a hustle, I can't define success. And if I don't define success, I probably aren't going to escape the hustle. So it's just having that appreciation, having that awareness, and then having the desire and the commitment to go, okay, I want these two things. I don't want to be caught up in a hustle, constantly comparing myself to someone else. And I also don't want to be following a version of success that might mean absolutely nothing to me. I want to make my life mean something. I want to pursue something that when I reach it is going to put a smile on my face rather than, is this it? Because that's what happens to most people. They achieve success, quote unquote. And then they reach it and go, now what? Don't you want to actually reach it and go, yeah, this is good. I'm happy with where I am right now. Okay, now I can move on to the next thing, but I'm appreciative of where I am right now. So that's kind of like the foundations of doing it. The starting
Amazing.
block of appreciating it.
You know, I wanted to dive in a little bit on the manifestation of Ferdinand. You know, this avatar that you created in order to walk through this journey. How did that come about in terms of, you know, why wasn't it Matthew? Why wasn't it someone else? Why did it have to be, you know, this particular avatar? Was there something, you know, was there some kind of relationship you were trying to dissect, or was it just trying to find someone or something more relatable that would relate to more people? How did that come about?
Yeah, the one thing all my books have in common, novels, nonfiction, like Beyond the Pale, a bit of in between, they are all driven by some kind of pain, some kind of question, some kind of curiosity that is inside me at that given time. And for me, I best learn when I take a little bit of pressure off of me. Like if I just throw myself into, you know, transforming and finding myself by just doing the thing, I find that very pressure filled. And I also find it's not a good way for me to learn. I've always been a good learner when I'm able to apply what I'm experimenting and exploring and then put it into my own words. So whenever I approach a book, and Beyond the Pale was no different, I'm trying to explore something. So in this case, one of the overarching themes was this idea of a hustle and my relationship with it. And I better digest it and I better understand it and I better appreciate it if I'm able to create a story out of it. And what better way to do that than being able to create some fictional character who shares certain similarities to me and shares certain traits as me, but is also very different to me. I'm able to explore what I want to do, explore, and have certain outer body experiences. And that's just how I personally digest it as a writer. It's personally how I'm able to better expand and grow as a person when I'm able to write it, when I'm able to explore it and live it as like this external avatar that is Ferdinand. Like I say, we share certain similarities. We're walking hand in hand, but I'm not Ferdinand and he ain't me. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. Thank you so much for explaining that part. Matthew, where can people find out more about you, find out more about the book, and how can they reach out to you directly if they want to learn more?
Yeah, the perfect place is beyondbook.co. That's beyondbook.co. You'll be able to get read the first couple of chapters of Beyond the Pale for free on that site to get a feel for whether you would like to embark on a journey with Ferdinand And then if you do, there's all the links to the book itself and where to buy it and whatnot. There's also links on there to my Instagram and Facebook and things of that nature. So if you have any kind of questions, if this has sparked some kind of curiosity in you, I'd love to hear from you. So please, like, drop me a DM, slide in there and let me know, like, ask away. I'm always delighted to, hear from people who have listened to some kind of podcast or video like we're doing now, and they've had that curiosity sparked. So please don't be shy, like, reach out to me. I'd love to chat.
You got it. Matthew, thank you for joining me today. It's been a lot of fun. I found this very interesting. Not only to talk about your journey and how you created this book, but also like to sort of dissect some of the other aspects of what makes us move and try to succeed, and where we fail, and where we can make it happen. So thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. Been a real pleasure. And yeah, it's a wonderful rabbit hole. It's full of twists and turns. But yeah, I certainly encourage anyone listening and watching to this to take that step. It brings your life more purpose. And what better way to live than that, right?